The anger is unabated in Tunisia. The opposition calling a general strike for Friday after masked hitmen gunned down a key opposition leader in broad daylight. Choukri Belaid, one of the most outspoken critics of the ruling Islamist Ennahda party. Ennahda, which Thursday disowned the Prime Minister's call for a government of technocrats to get through the worst crisis of the two-year transition that's followed the overthrow of longtime strongman Zine El Abidine Ben Ali. Who calls the shots among the Islamists? A question often asked of another Arab Spring poster child, Egypt, where the President Mohamed Morsi hails from the Muslim Brotherhood. Is it down to their policies or inexperience for parties who've never been in power, having trouble sailing through these rough waters? Either way, be it with the political transition in countries like Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt, or the civil war in Syria, there's at best uncertainty and wavering, at worst a power vacuum. And that's opened the door to hardliners, like the Salafists who attacked the U.S. consulate in Benghazi back in September, killing the American ambassador. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at political Islam and the Arab Spring. With us to talk about it from France 24's Arab language channel, Mohamed SALEM. Welcome, sir. You hail from Cairo.
Exactly.
We'll be hearing your perspectives in a moment. Saida Ounissi, she's born in Tunisia, researcher in political science at Paris's Sorbonne University and spokesperson for the Union for Islamic Organization in France. What is the Union for Islamic Organization in France?
It's a French NGO which is gathering all the Muslim organizations in France, and it's a federation which aims to stand up for Muslim rights in France.
All right, also with us, Stephen Ekovich, who teaches political science at the American University of Paris. When was your first trip to Tunisia?
1988.
1988, a while back.
And I've been going back regularly.
Okay. An Iranian-born attorney, Ardavan Amir-Aslani. Welcome back, sir, to the France 24
debate. Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, where you can find our hashtag F24debate. As we said at the top, events unfolding fast in Tunisia following the killing of Choukri Belaid, Tunisia's prime minister, who, by the way, is also the number 2 of Ennahda, took to the airwaves Wednesday evening.
I have decided to form a technocrat government made up of non-partisan leaders working for the nation.
But this Thursday morning, he was disowned by his own party, Ennahda, which in the outgoing coalition government has the prime minister's portfolios as justice, foreign affairs, and interior, saying the prime minister did not seek the opinion of his party. We believe Tunisia needs a political government now. We will continue discussions with other parties about forming a coalition government. I don't want to go too much into domestic politics in Tunisia, but what's going on? Does this mean that the prime minister has been outflanked by a more hardline faction within his own party?
Well, personally, I think that it's most a sign of internal democracy within the party. It's a party which is not very experienced in dealing with the power. So this is a very specific situation with a high political crisis following the assassinate of Mr. Belaid, rahimahullah, and it's actually, I think, a sign of internal debate which is now raising in the public space.
But it makes the prime minister look bad.
Yes, definitely. But I think that this is also a part of the democratic situation. There is debates, opposition, like what we saw in UMP, for example, in France. So I don't think that it's a very specific situation to Ennahda. It's something which is also could be seen in other parties, I think.
Stephen Ekovich, you agree?
I would have doubts about that. Because if there were really debates, the prime minister would have had a debate beforehand about this decision and not afterwards. I wonder about the real power, which is Mr. Ghannouchi, the president of the party. I think if we're going to look at the democratic nature of the parties in Tunisia, the least democratic party is Ennahda. It's been organized along very hierarchical lines, and usually what Mr. Ghannouchi says goes. So it'd be very interesting to know. We don't know today.
We don't know yet.
What the position of Mr. Hanouchi was. On the other hand, the opposition parties, which are liberal parties, there we do see a real democratic ferment. In fact, it's at one and the same time the advantage of those opposition parties and the disadvantage, because it takes a much longer time to come to a decision, because there is a lot of internal debate. For example, within Nida Tunis, which is now the major party challenging Ennahda, including its coalition partners, for example, the Popular Front, of which Mr. Belaid was a leader of one of the minor parties, as well as the Republican Party and others. So there we do have a real democratic ferment, really do have a democratic decision-making process. So I would have to say maybe there is some element of democratic decision-making in Ennahda, but if I were to rank parties in terms of their democratic decision-making, I would certainly put Ennahda at the bottom.
All right, we asked you on Twitter if Ennahda breaking ranks with a prime minister from its own ranks shows the limits of political Islam. Clive Knows replied, no, managing flux and muddling through. If that sounds like the UK, it was intentional. In other words, there's always a bit of improvisation in politics. In this case, as I mentioned, Ardavan Amir-Aslani, Ennahda has a lot of choice portfolios, and they don't want to give them up.
The firing of the government by the prime minister has consequences. This is not about, in my opinion, debates between Ennahda or government ministers. Firing the government a day after the horrendous assassination of the opposition leader, what does that mean? This means that the government, by discarding the religious side of it and by basically saying, I'm going to hire in technocrats to run the country pending upcoming elections, this means that Ennahda bears a certain degree of responsibility. Political Islam bears a certain degree of responsibility. After all, this government is a reflection of the vote of the people. They were elected. So why fire them? Firing them is acknowledging a certain level of responsibility for the turmoil, and that's why Ennahda is not happy, because they're saying, by firing the government, you're putting the responsibility on political Islam that we personify.
Saida, Ounissi, we say Ennahda, but 24 hours ago on this set, we were speaking with a member of Ennahda who's in the parliament, and she was endorsing the prime minister's move. She thought it was a good idea. So again, the question, is it the hardliners who've outflanked the moderates?
Well, this debate is going within Ennahda since a long time now. You're not within knowing that this a proposal of having a remaniement of the government is going since maybe 2 months. So this actually decision is more accelerated, but it's not new. It has been followed since a long time, and I think that yes, I do believe that what happened in Tunisia yesterday, and also the demonstrations, which where the consequences, it's not just about an assassination. It's also all the contestation which is going on in Tunisia since some months now, and also the calling for elections, the calling for economical standing proposals from the government is also linked to what we are seeing now.
There have been a lot of negotiations in the past couple of months about shuffling the government. They've led nowhere. There's been absolutely no agreement between Ennahda and the opposition parties. So the population has been asking questions as to whether or not there's a real desire on the part of Ennahda to change the government or not. And indeed, this has precipitated those discussions, which had really come to a dead end last week.
And add to that, Mohamed SALEM, we're going to talk about Egypt later, but when it comes to Tunisia, it's the same problem. The timeline is the same. It's been 2 years since the overthrow of longtime strongmen, and people are getting impatient.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting here in Tunisia is that, as we were saying, we have been talking since a long time about shuffling the government, but why now? I mean, did we have to wait for the catastrophe to happen to do it? And I think Ennahda, they were waiting and waiting and waiting, and now they feel that the anger is so big that they have to give something like in counterpart to the people. And now it was the time maybe for Jebali to announce it, but not for Ennahda. And so I think there's a lot of chaos inside the party itself. And as you said, you had a guest who was backing the prime minister, but the party is not. So it's really...
Just to follow what you're saying, Ennahda came to power with elections. So, and
they're in a coalition.
And the MP, Amir-Aslani, who was speaking, she has been elected by the people. And the assembly, the Constitutional Assembly, is composed mainly from members from Ennahda. So they do actually say that we are legitimate. So we have also this responsibility to lead the country because of the people's choice.
There's no question about that. Everybody agrees about that. The question
I mean,
is how they've been leading.
it's important to recall it too.
Okay. Right, and there's the problem of increased polarization, increasing tension, attacks by hardliners, Salafists on university campuses, and they've also attacked bars, and it's contributed to a growing sense of lawlessness. Now, Tunisia's president, who doesn't hail from Ennahda but from the from a secular party, agreeing with Ennahda in condoning these controversial committees, leagues, if you want, for the protection of the revolution, leagues which the secular opposition denounces as pro-Ennahda militias.
These are the offices of the Tunisian Workers' Party, attacked and looted by supporters of the ruling Ennahda party after the assassination of Choukri Belaid. In response, opposition supporters sacked the office of the local League for the Protection of the Revolution, a group they say were responsible for the killing. These leagues have previously shown they're willing to threaten opposition groups such as Nida Tunis, which was planning to hold a meeting at a hotel last November.
We've come to protect this hotel, but only if this meeting doesn't take place. If it does go ahead, we can't be held responsible for what might happen. The police and the army don't scare us.
We told the hotel's manager this party isn't like the others. It's a party that's against the revolution. So in the same way that we faced up to Ben Ali, we'll carry out our duty and we'll remove the remnants of the regime.
At this protest in January, the League's activists stamped on the flag of Nida Tunis. For more than a year, groups like this have monitored who visits their neighbourhoods while trying to infiltrate parties who they say are enemies of the revolution. They've often used threatening tactics to achieve their aims, even when the police are watching.
They were going to hit us for taking a picture.
They said to us, "Does that bother you, the Nida Tunis flag on the ground?" And we said yes.
This particular league calls itself the Spirit of the Revolution. It's even threatened the Tunisian Association for the Support of Minorities because they commemorated the deporting of Tunisia's Jews during World War II.
And all this taking place in a context where the police is discredited to a large degree, much as is the case in Egypt.
Exactly, because the repression is the same, the violence is the same. If I speak
so more and more these sort of parallel orders that are coming up.
Yeah. Like we've seen in Egypt lately, the man who was beaten next to the presidential palace, who was stripped off his clothes, and people now are saying, so what's different? Like you were saying, 2 years have passed, and where's the difference in the police treatment to the people? People are still being humiliated, a lot of tear gas, a lot of bullets, many dead everywhere. So.
But one institution that has been changed to some extent in Tunisia is the police. The police, basically, after the departure of Ben Ali, disappeared. So they were replaced. So there is an attempt to rebuild a democratic police force. However, in the mind of the population, the police is still the police. And whoever uses tear gas, whoever uses some force, the police have not fired on the crowds. They've only gone so far as to use tear gas, for example. That's very low in the hierarchy of possible responses of the police. So I think that we cannot say the police today are the same as the police of Ben Ali. But once again, in the mind of the people, when the police strike, they connect that to the recent past when the police acted very brutally against the people of Tunisia.
But as we saw in that report, as a result, you've got these leagues for the protection of the revolution, and it gets bandied about this term of counter-revolutionaries, and everybody uses it, but it doesn't mean the same thing according to who you speak to.
Well, the irony of the term is they're not protecting the revolution. These are bands, let's be honest, these are bands of ruffians who use more than threats. That's what your report said. They use brutality. They beat up people. They go to meetings and they break up these meetings of opposition groups using brutal force to such an extent that not just a couple of weeks ago, one of the high-ranking members of Nida Tunis was beaten to death by these ruffians. So I think that one of the consequences of what's happening in Tunisia now is that the president and others, the government of Tunisia will have to have to clearly outlaw these private militias.
Yeah, there is definitely a lack of confidence, I think, between the police and the population, which is also one of the consequences of Ben Ali regime.
Should these leagues for the protection of the revolution be banned?
I think there is like a lot of calls in Tunisia for the ban of this League of Revolution, which actually, if they are outrepassing, if they are going more than what the law allowed them to, obviously, but that's also the case for every single group in Tunisia, not only the League of Revolution. I think what's dangerous with the League of Revolution is that when they do stand up against Nida Tunis, which is, and everybody knows that, formed of most of the former leaders from the RCD party, when these people do stand up against Nida Tunis,
that's not true.
We actually accuse them of, well, Beji Qaid Sibsi, who is the leader, of Nida Tunis, is also,
if you look at the members all 50 members of the executive committee of Nida Tunis, you're going to find only a very small, maybe 3 or 4, who were previously even members of the RCD. So it's simply a false charge. Yeah.
Well, most of the leaders of
Nida likes
Tunis
to brand against Nida Tunis. There are ways to oppose another party, but not using brutal force. And that principle has to be clearly established in Tunisia. And therefore, these so-called leagues for the protection of the revolution must be banned. The problem is the law is ambiguous on this. And another problem is the Minister of the Interior is Ennahda. So anytime there's any kind of excess like this, immediately in the minds of the people, the Interior Minister, who's Ennahda, his legitimacy is going to be called into question.
It's more complicated.
It's more complicated than that. Ardavan, Amir-Aslani.
Can I just explain the complication?
This goes back to the theme of this debate about political Islam. Today, both in Tunisia and Egypt, we've got governments that derive their arguments, their ideology from religion. What we're seeing in Egypt...
And their legitimacy from the ballot box.
Of course, but also from religion. I mean, Tunisia is even better off than what's happening in Egypt today. In Egypt, 2 years after, you've got a president who's declared a state of emergency in 3 of the most populous states in Egypt, Suez, Ismailia, and Port Said. You've got soldiers shooting and with real bullets at the people and killing by the dozens. You have not a single member of the previous regime that has been condemned in courts by anyone. Even Mubarak's sentence was overturned by the appellate court. So people are thinking, when you've got a government comprised of people whose legitimacy initially derived from the voting process, but then who call themselves Sharia, who call themselves men of God, things may become different. And the question that people are asking in Tunisia and in the streets of Cairo is, okay, one man, one vote, but one time only. And that's what scares these people. That's the threat. And it all goes back to political Islam. Political Islam and people in front of it believe that once they land the job, they'll never let it go.
All right, we'll pick up on that point because I'm sure the other members of the panel have stuff to say on that. Stay with us. It's the France 24 debate.